With 1 hour before the last flight that could carry him to his mother's funeral, Lucas Bennett was stopped at the gate when a wealthy businesswoman named Vanessa Cole demanded his seat and offered any price. He refused because it was his final chance to say goodbye. The argument escalated until the shift manager and everyone above him sided with the powerful woman and canceled his ticket. Lucas did not raise his voice. He walked to the service desk and asked them to verify the legal owner of the airline. Seconds later, the terminal went silent. The house on the west edge of Omaha had a gravel drive and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the left, and Lucas Bennett had never fixed either. He drove a 9-year-old sedan. He bought his coffee from the same gas station on Dodge Street every morning, and the woman behind the counter believed he worked in insurance. He had never corrected her. At 42, Lucas had built a life so unremarkable that people forgot him within an hour of meeting him, and that was the point. His neighbors knew 3 things about him. He was a single father, he worked from home, and he did something with airlines, some kind of analysis numbers, and routes and delay patterns, the sort of job that sounded important, until you asked a second question and realized you did not understand the answer. Lucas let the description stand. When someone asked what he did, he said he studied flight data, and it was not a lie. What none of them knew was that 11 years earlier, in a rented office above a tire shop, Lucas had signed the incorporation papers for a company called Aviation Group. It had owned nothing then except a lease on 2 turboprops and a debt he could not describe out loud without his voice shaking. Now it owned 4 regional carriers, a ground services division that handled more than 60 airports, a maintenance network, and a controlling stake in a fuel logistics firm that supplied half the Midwest. He had structured it so that his name appeared in exactly one place on the ownership registry, buried under a holding company and a trust. There was no photograph of him on any website. He had never given an interview. The board knew him. His chief of staff, Daniel Rourke, knew him. The rest of the company knew only that there was a founder somewhere and that he preferred to remain a rumor. There was a reason for it that Lucas rarely spoke about. He had watched what happened to men who wore their money in public, what it did to the way people spoke to them and to the way they spoke back. He had decided early that he wanted to know how the world treated a man who looked like nothing. It was, he had told himself, the only honest way to measure a company from the inside. His mother was the only person who had known everything from the beginning. Margaret Bennett had been a widow for 26 years. She had raised Lucas alone in a rented duplex in Charleston, South Carolina, working the front desk of a hotel that no longer existed, and she had never once suggested that his ambitions were unreasonable. When the first 2 turboprops sat grounded for 4 months and Lucas could not make payroll, she had wired him $11,000 without asking when she would get it back. It was every dollar she had. He had repaid it 40 times over, and she had never mentioned it again. She called him on Sundays. She asked about the weather in Nebraska and about whether he was sleeping. She never asked about revenue or the board or the acquisitions, because she had understood something about her son that no analyst ever had, which was that the company was not the achievement. The achievement was that he had stayed the same man. The last Sunday call had been ordinary. She had told him about a leak in the kitchen ceiling and a neighbor's dog that barked at nothing. He had told her he would come down in the fall, and she had said the fall was a long way off, and he had said he knew. He was reviewing a route performance file on a Tuesday afternoon when his phone rang, and the name on the screen was a cousin he spoke to perhaps twice a year. The stroke had happened that morning fast in the kitchen. The paramedics had reached her in under 9 minutes, and none of it had mattered. Lucas listened to the entire explanation without interrupting. Then he asked when the service would be held. Thursday morning, 10 o'clock at the church on Ashley Avenue, where she had gone every week for 30 years. He set the phone down on the desk and looked at the wall for a long time without seeing it. Then he opened his laptop, because that was what he knew how to do. The storm was already on the maps. A system had come up off the Atlantic and stalled over the Carolinas, and the models showed the coastal corridor collapsing late Wednesday night and Charleston going below landing minimums by 2 or 3 in the morning, closed through most of Thursday and possibly into Friday. There was one window, and it was Wednesday evening, and it was narrow. His own aircraft were useless to him. Apex operated a small executive fleet, and every airframe was either on assignment or positioned east of the system, and the 2 that could theoretically reposition to Omaha would not arrive in time to beat the coastal restrictions. Lucas ran it twice. He was the owner of an aviation empire, and the physics of the sky did not care. Daniel Rourke called him 20 minutes later, having heard through the family message chain, and offered to make arrangements. He used the word arrangements the way a man does when he means he will move whatever needs moving. Lucas told him no. He said he would find a commercial seat like anyone else, and when Rourke started to argue, Lucas said something that Rourke would repeat to other people for years afterward. If a man can't get to his mother's funeral on the system he built, Lucas said, then the system is broken, and I'd rather find out now. There was one seat left on the only itinerary that worked. Northline Airways, out of Omaha on Wednesday evening, connecting once in Atlanta, and landing in Charleston at 11:35 at night Eastern Time, which gave him 10 hours of margin before the service. Northline was an Apex subsidiary. Lucas booked the last available seat under his own name, 27C, and paid $418 for it on a personal card. He packed a black suit, a white shirt, and a tie he had bought for his mother's 70th birthday. He was at the airport by 4 o'clock Wednesday afternoon. The terminal was crowded in the particular way of an evening when weather has begun to eat into schedules elsewhere. Departure boards showed a scatter of yellow. Lucas stood in line at security in a gray jacket and worn boots carrying one bag, and no one looked at him twice. At gate 14, he sat 6 seats from the counter and did not take out his laptop. He watched the ground crew work the aircraft. He watched a fuel truck disconnect. He had spent 11 years reading these movements as data, and now he watched them as a man waiting to bury his mother, and he found that they meant nothing at all. Flight 290 was scheduled to depart at 6:55. The gate would close at 6:40. Vanessa Cole arrived at 5:20 with 3 people walking behind her. Lucas noticed her before she reached the counter because everyone did. She was in her early 40s in a charcoal coat that had been cut for her specifically, and she moved through the concourse without adjusting her path for anyone. The 3 behind her carried the bags. One of them was on a phone, repeating something twice. She went directly to the gate agent, a young woman with dark hair pulled back and a badge that read Claire Donovan, and she did not begin with a greeting. "I have 3 seats in row 27 and 4 people," Vanessa said. "I need a 4th. Claire checked her screen and told her that Flight 290 had sold out the previous afternoon, that there was not an empty seat anywhere on the aircraft, and that the 4th traveler was currently unassigned and standing by. "Then find one," Vanessa said. Claire explained that the only thing she could do was ask over the public address whether any passenger would voluntarily release a confirmed seat in exchange for compensation and a rebooking, and that she could ask, but that she could not require it. Vanessa told her to ask. The announcement went out at 5:30. 1 volunteer a rebooking a hotel and a credit. Nobody moved. Lucas understood why. Everyone at that gate was flying toward the same closing sky, and none of them had a second option either. Vanessa turned and scanned the seating area, and her eyes moved across faces the way a person reads a price list. She spoke to her assistant, who came back a moment later from the counter with a printed sheet, and she looked at it. And then she looked directly at Lucas. She walked over and sat down in the empty chair beside him without being invited. "You're 27C," she said. Lucas said that he was. "My row is 27A, B, and D," Vanessa said. "You are the hole in the middle of it. I have 4 people and 3 hours in the air to finish a presentation that decides whether my firm survives the quarter, and I cannot do that with one of my partners seated 11 rows away." Name a number. He said the seat was not for sale. Everything is for sale, she said. $2,000. Lucas looked at the window instead of at her and told her that he was flying to his mother's funeral, that the service was 10 o'clock Thursday morning in Charleston, and that this was the last aircraft that could reach the field before it went below minimums. He said it plainly the way a man states a fact he has already accepted, and he did not raise his voice. Something passed across Vanessa's face. It was there for less than a second, and then it was gone, replaced by the expression of a person who has decided that a difficulty is a negotiation. $5,000, she said. $5,000 and I'll have my office put you on the first flight tomorrow morning, first class, and a car waiting. He told her there would be no flight tomorrow morning. He told her the field would be below landing minimums by around 3, that it would stay that way through most of Thursday and possibly Friday, and that he had pulled the models himself, and that the rebooking she was describing did not exist. Then take the money and take the risk, Vanessa said. That's what the rest of us do. Lucas turned and looked at her then for the first time. He said no. He said it once quietly and turned back to the window. Vanessa stood up. She said nothing further to him. She walked back to the counter, set her phone face up on the surface between herself and Claire Donovan, and asked for the name of the station manager on duty. The next 14 minutes were the part Lucas would remember most clearly afterward, and not because of the shouting, because there was none. Vanessa made 2 calls. The first was to a man whose name she used as though it were a key, someone in Northline's commercial division who owed her firm something or wanted something from it. The second was shorter. Then a man in a blue blazer came up the corridor from the operations door, mid-50s, walking quickly, and his badge read, Trevor Doyle, Shift Manager. Doyle spoke to Vanessa first. He listened, nodded twice, said the words absolutely, and of course, and then went behind the counter and began typing. Claire Donovan said something to him that Lucas could not hear. Doyle answered without looking up. Claire said something else, and this time Lucas caught the last part of it, which was that the passenger had not consented, and the seat was confirmed. It's under review, Doyle said. That's not the same thing as confirmed. What followed was procedure used as a weapon, and Lucas recognized every step of it, because he had personally approved the policy document that made each step possible. Doyle called him to the counter and told him there was an irregularity on his booking. He said the payment method required secondary verification. He said that a one-way itinerary purchased close to departure by a passenger traveling alone with a single carry-on matched a screening profile, and that under the carrier's conditions of carriage, the airline reserved the right to refuse transport pending review. Lucas told him that the code he had just described was a fraud screening code, that it existed to stop stolen cards, and that nothing about the reservation had triggered it until 14 minutes ago. That's not for me to discuss, Doyle said. Lucas asked how long the review would take. As long as it takes. Lucas asked whether the review had been opened before or after the woman in the charcoal coat had spoken to him. Doyle said he would not be discussing other passengers. Boarding began. Doyle kept typing. Claire Donovan stood at the scanner and processed passengers, and her jaw was tight, and twice she looked over at Lucas, and twice she looked away. At 9 minutes past 6, Doyle told Lucas that the review had concluded that his reservation had been canceled, that a refund would be processed within 7 to 10 business days, and that he was welcome to rebook, subject to availability. Vanessa's assistant was already at the scanner with 4 boarding passes. Lucas did not argue. He did not raise his voice, and he did not tell Doyle what he was. And later, when people asked him why he would say that a man who has to announce his power in order to have it does not have any, instead he looked at the clock and then at the jet bridge door, and he understood exactly what he was standing in. He had spent 11 years building a company on the premise that a passenger with no leverage should still be treated as a passenger. He had written that sentence himself at a folding table above a tire shop, while his mother was still alive to hear him say it out loud over the phone. And now, 46 minutes before the last aircraft that could carry him to her grave, a shift manager was canceling his ticket to make room for a woman who had offered him $5,000. There were two choices, and both of them cost something. Accept it, walk out to the parking garage and miss the only funeral he would ever be able to attend. Or say the thing he had not said out loud to a stranger in 11 years and give up the anonymity that had let him see his own company clearly. Lucas picked up his bag. He stopped at the end of the counter where Claire Donovan was scanning passes, and he spoke to her quietly enough that Doyle did not hear it. "You have a compliance tab in the corporate directory," he said. "Under it, there's an ownership registry. I'm asking you to open it and look up the controlling owner of Northline Airways, the parent entity, and the natural person behind the trust. 2 clicks. That's all I'm asking anyone to do." Claire looked at him. She did not answer. Then Lucas walked down the concourse to the Northline customer service desk at the center of the terminal, where a supervisor stood behind a counter with a headset around her neck, and he set his bag down and put both hands flat on the surface. "I need you to run a verification," he said. "Not on my ticket, on the ownership registry." She asked him what he meant. "Northline Airways," Lucas said. "Who legally owns it? You have access to that record. It takes about 90 seconds. She looked at the gray jacket, the worn boots, the single bag, and she did not move. "Please," Lucas said, "run it." The supervisor's name was Bethany Kroll, and she had worked the customer service desk in Omaha for 6 years. She did not run the verification. She told Lucas that ownership records were not something she could pull at a service counter, which was not true, and that he needed to take his complaint to the gate, which was where the complaint had started. Lucas told her the record was 2 clicks away, and that he would wait. Bethany looked past him toward the concourse instead of at her screen. Behind him, the story had traveled the way things travel in an airport, from the scanner to the jet bridge to the operations door and back again. And by 18 minutes past 6, there were people watching. Vanessa Cole had not boarded. She stood 20 feet back with her coat over her arm, watching Lucas the way a person watches a car alarm that will not stop. Trevor Doyle came down the concourse with a printed page in his hand. He did not address Lucas at first. He told Bethany that the reservation had been canceled following a review, that the matter was closed, and that if the passenger continued making demands at multiple service points, it would be logged as a disruption. Lucas asked him again to run the ownership record. "I know what you're doing," Doyle said. "You'll keep asking for something nobody at this desk can give you. You'll run the clock, and then you'll tell me the flight left without you, and it's our fault. I've been doing this 21 years. It's the oldest one there is." Vanessa's voice came from behind them, unhurried. She said that the gentleman had already turned down $5,000, and that in her experience, a man who refuses $5,000 is not looking for money. He is looking for an audience. A few people near the counter laughed, not unkindly and not loudly, which somehow made it worse. Lucas did not turn around. He kept both hands flat on the counter and asked Bethany Kroll one more time to retrieve the controlling ownership entry for Northline Airways and the natural person listed behind the parent trust. Bethany typed something. Whether it was the query or a note in his passenger record, Lucas could not see. The clock above the desk read 22 minutes past 6. The gate would close at 6:40. Everything he had built, every process he had signed off on, every escalation path he had approved, and none of it could move fast enough to put him on an aircraft sitting 300 feet away with its door still open. He thought about calling Daniel Rourke. 1 call 40 seconds, and a man in Denver would begin making calls that would end with Trevor Doyle standing in a hallway explaining himself. He took out his phone and looked at it, and did not make the call. And it was not pride that stopped him. It was the thought that if he had to reach outside the building to be treated correctly inside it, then he already had his answer about the company, and it was the worst possible answer. So he put the phone face down on the counter, and told Bethany he was not leaving until someone ran it. Doyle told him security would be called. "Call them," Lucas said. What he did not know was that the verification had already been run. Claire Donovan had run it at 18 minutes past 6 from the gate terminal while she was supposed to be closing out the boarding manifest. She had run it because a passenger had stood at the end of her counter and named the exact tab in the exact language of the internal directory, and because in 14 months on the job, she had never once heard a passenger use those words. The record opened in a plain gray window with no formatting the way internal records do. Northline Airways' wholly owned subsidiary, parent entity Apex Aviation Group, controlling interest held through the Bennett Family Trust, beneficial owner and founder natural person, Lucas M. Bennett, date of birth, and a residential address in Omaha, Nebraska, and beneath it, a compliance flag, stating that the individual's travel was not to be disclosed to station personnel without written authorization. Claire read it 3 times. Then she looked at the canceled reservation still open in the adjacent window seat, 27 Soap T passenger Bennett Lucas M., and felt the floor of her working life tilt. She did not shout it across the terminal. She did the thing she had been trained to do, which was escalate a compliance flag, and the system offered exactly 2 addresses for that category: the corporate compliance mailbox and the station director's line. And she sent it to both. At 19 minutes past 6, the station director's phone rang on the second level of the terminal. Raymond Gallagher had been finishing a delay report. He listened for 9 seconds, said the words, "Say that again," listened for another 20, and then he was moving. At 21 minutes past 6, the compliance mailbox forwarded automatically to the executive duty line, and in Denver, in a glass conference room, where a quarterly review had been running for 2 hours, Catherine Sloan's phone lit up on the table in front of her. Sloan had been chief executive of Northline for 3 years. She had met Lucas Bennett exactly 4 times, all of them in rooms with fewer than 6 people, and she had signed a non-disclosure covering his existence before she had signed her employment contract. She read the alert, stood up in the middle of a sentence someone else was speaking, and walked out of the room with the phone against her ear. Down on the main concourse, a uniformed officer was asking Lucas for identification. He produced his driver's license, Nebraska gray jacket, a photograph in which he looked exactly as tired as he looked in person. The officer read the name, handed it back, and told him not unpleasantly that he needed to either accept the rebooking or step away from the counter. "I understand," Lucas said, and did not move. Vanessa stepped closer. She was still holding her coat, and she had the look of a person who has won something and is discovering that the winning did not feel the way she expected. "You could have taken the money," she said. "You still can. $10,000. I'll write it in front of you right now, and you keep whatever refund they give you. Go home and drive tomorrow if you have to." Lucas asked whether she had ever driven from Omaha to Charleston. She said she had not. 22 hours, he said. "The service is at 10 in the morning. It's 24 minutes past 6 at night." She started to say something and did not finish it because at that moment there was movement at the far end of the concourse. Raymond Gallagher came through the operations door at a pace station directors do not use in public areas, a lanyard swinging against his chest and a tablet in one hand on twist. 2 operations supervisors followed him, and behind them, still fixing a badge into place, the duty manager for the entire terminal. Gallagher did not go to Doyle. He went straight past Doyle, past Vanessa, past the officer, and stopped in front of Lucas Bennett, and stood there a moment the way a man does when he is confirming with his own eyes something he has already been told. "Mr. Bennett," Gallagher said. Every person within 30 feet heard the way he said it. Lucas told him he had a canceled reservation on flight 290 seat 27C, and that he had been informed the fare was under review. Gallagher turned around. He looked at Trevor Doyle, then at the printed page in Doyle's hand, then at Bethany Kroll behind the counter, and something happened to his face that was worse than anger. "Reinstate it," Gallagher said. "Now." Bethany typed. From where he stood, Lucas could see her screen, and he watched the reservation return to confirmed status in under 4 seconds, which was approximately how long the entire process had ever needed to take. Doyle asked what was going on. Nobody answered him. In the silence, Gallagher's tablet chimed, and he looked at it and handed it across to Doyle without a word. Lucas watched the shift manager read it. He watched the man's eyes move down the plain gray record stop, go back to the top, and start again. He watched the color leave Trevor Doyle's face in the specific way it leaves a person who has just understood the last 20 minutes of his life in reverse. The terminal did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a ring spreading outward from the counter as the people nearest passed it back to the people behind them. Vanessa Cole heard it from her own assistant, who had been standing close enough to read over Doyle's shoulder. The assistant leaned in and said 4 words. Vanessa's expression did not change immediately. She turned and looked at Lucas, at the gray jacket, at the single bag on the floor beside him, at the man she had offered $10,000 to 5 minutes earlier. "You own it," she said. Lucas told her he owned the parent company, that Northline was one of 4 carriers under it, and that he had been sitting at gate 14 for 2 hours because he needed to get to Charleston. Gallagher's phone rang. He answered, said yes twice, and held it out. Catherine Sloane's voice came through clearly enough that the people nearest could hear it. She apologized. She said she was already on a line with the Duty Operations Center, that the aircraft would not push back without him, that she was opening an immediate review of the station, and that she needed to know what he wanted done about the personnel involved. Lucas listened to all of it. Then he said the thing nobody standing in that concourse expected. "Nothing," he said. "Not tonight." He said that no one was to be suspended, escorted out, or spoken to on the floor. He said that the woman in the charcoal coat and her 3 colleagues were to board as ticketed in the seats they had bought, and that if anyone attempted to remove them from the aircraft, he would treat it as a personal instruction violated. He said the only thing he wanted from Northline Airways in the next 90 seconds was the same thing any passenger holding a confirmed reservation wanted, which was to be allowed onto the aircraft. Gallagher started to say that this was not adequate. "It's what I'm asking for," Lucas said. "My mother is being buried at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's the entire problem. Everything else is a memo, and memos can wait until Monday." He picked up his bag and walked to gate 14, and the crowd opened for him, and Claire Donovan was standing at the scanner with his boarding pass already printed, because she had printed it 6 minutes before anyone told her to. She handed it to him and said she was sorry. Lucas told her she was the only person in the building who had done her job, and that he would remember it, and then he walked down the jet bridge. He was in seat 27C at 38 minutes past 6. Vanessa Cole took 27A, and 2 of her colleagues took B and D, and the 4th stood by until the last moment and was given a seat 11 rows forward when a connecting passenger failed to appear. Nobody in that row said a word to anyone. The aircraft pushed back at 7 minutes past 7, 12 minutes late. They had been at cruise for an hour and 40 minutes when the captain's voice came over the cabin. The system off the Carolinas had not behaved the way the models predicted. Instead of holding until the early hours, it had accelerated northwest and thickened, and the coastal corridor was collapsing 5 hours ahead of forecast. Charleston had gone to 0 visibility with embedded convection, and had stopped accepting arrivals at 20 minutes to 10 Eastern Time. Lucas had his phone out the moment the wheels touched in Atlanta at 10:15. Every remaining option died in front of him over the next 40 minutes, one line at a time. The last Charleston departure was canceled. The alternate into Savannah was canceled. Columbia was canceled. Charlotte was still accepting arrivals, but the Interstate South had been closed at 2 points for standing water, and a drive that normally took 3 hours had become a distance no vehicle was going to cover before 10 in the morning. Daniel Rourke reached him in the concourse at 11:30, and by then Rourke had a plan, because that was what Rourke did. He said a Challenger had come off a charter into Nashville 40 minutes earlier, and was sitting there with a fresh airframe and no assignment close enough to reposition to Atlanta in 90 minutes. He said a Challenger could work an approach that a scheduled aircraft would not attempt, that the field was technically open under instrument minimums for portions of the night, and that 2 crews on standby would take the assignment if the owner of the company asked them to take it. Lucas asked what the actual conditions were at the field. Rourke read them out. Ceiling below minimums for the approach-in-use wind shear reported by 2 aircraft and a convective cell tracking directly across the final approach path with a clearance time nobody could commit to. "It's marginal," Rourke said. "It's not impossible. Crews fly marginal." Lucas asked whether the crew would be volunteering or being assigned. There was a silence on the line that answered the question before Rourke did. They'd know who was asking. Rourke said, "That's not the same as being ordered." "It's exactly the same," Lucas said. Vanessa Cole had been standing 8 feet away from most of that call. Her 3 colleagues had gotten out on a Miami connection at 20 to 10, and she had not gone with them. Lucas noticed her when he lowered the phone and did not have the energy to ask why she was still there. She asked him what he was going to do. He told her his people wanted to put a crew into weather below minimums so that a man could attend a funeral, and that he was going to tell them no. "You could order it," she said. "You have the authority. Nobody in that company would stop you." "That's why I can't," Lucas said. She looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed in a way that she seemed to notice herself. "6 hours ago, I told a shift manager to take a seat away from you," she said. "He did it in 14 minutes. I never once asked myself whether he could. I only asked whether he would." Lucas told her that was the difference. He said authority was not the ability to make people do things, because almost anyone with enough money could make people do things. He said authority was knowing which of those things you were never going to ask for, and that he had spent 11 years building a company on the second definition, and had watched it fail in 20 minutes at a gate in Omaha. Then he called Rourke back and instructed him formally on a recorded line that no Apex aircraft was to be dispatched into Charleston that night, that no crew was to be approached in any capacity, and that the standby assignment was to be canceled in writing. Rourke asked if he was sure. Lucas said he was, and ended the call, and sat down in a plastic chair in a nearly empty concourse in Atlanta, Georgia, at 20 minutes to 1 in the morning, with a black suit folded in the bag at his feet, and 9 hours between him and a church on Ashley Avenue that he was not going to reach. He sat in that chair through the rest of the night, and for most of it, he did not think about the company at all. He thought about a duplex in Charleston, with a kitchen that flooded when it rained hard, and a woman who came home from a hotel front desk at 11 at night and made a second dinner because she had not eaten at work. He thought about $11,000 wired without a question. He thought about the last Sunday call and a leak in a ceiling and a neighbor's dog that barked at nothing, and the fact that he had said the fall was still coming and had believed it. Vanessa Cole came back at 10 past 1 with 2 cups of coffee from the only counter still open, and set one on the seat beside him without asking whether he wanted it. She did not say anything for a while. When she did, she told him her firm's presentation had gone ahead in Miami without her, that her partners had handled it, and that she had spent 3 hours discovering that the meeting she had been willing to take a seat away from a grieving man for had not required her presence at all. Lucas told her that most of them don't. At 6:30 in the morning, his phone rang, and it was Daniel Rourke, and his voice was different. The cell had moved. Not cleared, moved, tracking northeast faster than the overnight model had shown, and the tail of the system had pulled a gap open behind it. Charleston had come back above minimums at 6:15. 2 aircraft had gone in since. The gap was projected to hold until roughly 10:50 in the morning, at which point the trailing moisture would close the field for the rest of the day. Rourke said he had done exactly what he had been instructed to do. The cancellation notice had gone out on the crew scheduling system at 10 minutes to 1 in writing, and he had approached nobody. And that a captain in Nashville named Alan Whitaker had read it, pulled the current conditions himself and called the duty desk at 6:20 to ask why an assignment had been canceled on a morning when the field was legal. "He wants to talk to you," Rourke said. Whitaker came on the line and did not waste time. He said he had 22,000 hours, that he had flown into Charleston more times than he could count, that he had pulled the terminal forecast, the field observations, the pilot reports, and the radar himself, and that in his own assessment, the approach was inside limits with margin for the next 4 hours. Lucas asked whether he knew who had canceled the assignment. "I do," Whitaker said, "and I know why. That's why I called." He said he had a first officer named Nora Kessler who had looked at the same data independently and reached the same conclusion that neither of them had been asked, ordered, or pressured, and that if at any point on the approach either of them did not like what they saw, they would go around and divert to Charlotte, and the owner of the company could sit in the back and watch them do it. "Those are the terms," Whitaker said. "If you can't take those terms, we don't go." Lucas asked him to state on the recorded line that the decision was his own. Whitaker said it. Kessler said it after him. Then Lucas asked one more question, which was why. "Because I buried my father in 2009, Whitaker said, "and I was in a hotel in Phoenix when it happened, and the airline I worked for then wouldn't move a seat for me. I've had 17 years to think about what I'd do if I ever got the chance to be on the other side of that." Lucas rescinded his own order on the same recorded line at 25 minutes to 7. He rescinded it in specific language, which was that the dispatch was authorized on the captain's assessment and the captain's authority alone, that the owner of the company held no operational role in the flight, and that a decision to divert or refuse at any point would be final and would carry no consequence of any kind. The Challenger repositioned from Nashville and was on the ground in Atlanta at 20 minutes to 9. While it was in the air, the other half of it was happening 600 miles away. Lucas had called his cousin at 10 minutes to 7, expecting to leave a message, and the phone was answered on the second ring because nobody in that family had slept. He explained where he was. He explained the window, the repositioning, the block time, and the drive from the field. And he said the best case put him at the cemetery somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes past 11, and that he was telling them this so they could go ahead without him. Thomas Reed, who had been pastor at the church on Ashley Avenue for 19 years and had known Margaret Bennett for all of them, called Lucas back 40 minutes later. He said the family had agreed and the congregation had been told. The service would begin at 10 as scheduled. The committal at the graveside, normally 40 minutes after, would be held to 11, and if the man was close, they would hold a few minutes past that. He said Margaret had sat in the 4th row on the left every Sunday for 30 years and had talked about her son more than she had talked about anything else, and that the church could manage to stand at a graveside a little longer for the one person she would have wanted there. Lucas thanked him and could not manage anything more than that. They took off at 18 minutes past 9. Vanessa Cole did not come. She had asked at the ramp door whether there was anything she could do, and Lucas had told her there was, and that it was not today, and not for him. She had asked what he meant, and he had said he would tell her when it was over, and then he had walked out onto the tarmac. The approach into Charleston was not smooth. The aircraft came down through layers that shifted and dropped and shifted again, and twice the airframe took a hit hard enough that Lucas put a hand flat against the cabin wall. He watched the altimeter on the bulkhead display and did the arithmetic he had done 10,000 times as an analyst and never once as a passenger with something at stake. At 500 feet, the runway lights came up through the murk exactly where they were supposed to be. They were on the ground at 31 minutes past 10, 19 minutes before the window closed. A car was waiting. Rourke had arranged it. Lucas changed in the back seat on the way the black suit and the white shirt and the tie he had bought for her 70th birthday, and the driver did not speak once in 26 minutes. The church on Ashley Avenue was white with a short set of steps and a bell tower that had never held a bell. He passed it without stopping. The service had ended, and the cars had already moved. He came up the path at the cemetery at 9 minutes past 11, and Thomas Reed saw him first and lifted a hand and stopped everything where it stood. The family turned. There were perhaps 60 people, most of them. Older, most of them. From a hotel that no longer existed, and a church that did. And they made a space for him at the front without anyone directing them to. The casket was still above the ground. Reed asked if he wanted to say anything, and Lucas said no, and then stood there a moment and changed his mind. He said his mother had given him $11,000 when $11,000 was all she had, and that she had never asked for it back and had never brought it up again. He said everything he had built had been built with that money, and that he had never found a way to tell her what it had turned into, and that he had spent the last 2 days learning he had been trying to tell her the wrong thing all along. He said the thing he should have told her was that she had been right about him before there was any evidence, and that he had been trying to deserve it ever since. Then he stepped back and let them lower her, and it was over at 26 minutes past 11, and the rain started again 8 minutes later. What happened afterward took 4 months. Lucas went back to Omaha the following Tuesday, and on the Wednesday, he opened a formal review of VIP handling and discretionary override procedures across all 4 Apex carriers. He did not run it himself. He brought in an outside firm, gave them unrestricted access, and instructed them in writing that no finding was to be softened on account of who had commissioned it. What came back was worse than the night in Omaha. The auditors found 386 instances across 26 months in which a confirmed passenger's reservation had been canceled, downgraded, or placed under review within 30 minutes of a request from a passenger flagged as high value. 90 of those involved a code designed for fraud screening and used in practice as a mechanism for taking seats. 17 involved passengers traveling for a death in the family. The report named the loophole exactly. The conditions of carriage permitted a station to refuse, transport pending review, and no policy anywhere required a station to record why the review had been opened. Lucas had approved that language himself in 2019 on the recommendation of a legal team protecting the company from liability. He read that page 4 times and then wrote a single line in the margin, which was that the failure originated with him. The changes went out in October. A review could no longer be opened by a station manager without a written reason, logged at the moment of opening, and a countersignature from a second station. A confirmed passenger could not be involuntarily removed to accommodate a seat request from another passenger under any circumstance, with no exception for elite tiers, corporate accounts, or codeshare partners. Every override was to appear on a monthly report that went to the board and to the frontline staff at every station. Trevor Doyle was not terminated for what he had done to Lucas Bennett. He was terminated for the 9 separate occasions in the preceding 2 years in which he had used the same code on passengers whose names nobody would ever know. And the letter said so specifically because Lucas had insisted the reason be stated plainly. Bethany Kroll was demoted and required to complete retraining, and she kept her job, which she had not expected to keep. Raymond Gallagher stayed on as station director. He had done the right thing within 4 minutes of learning the facts, and Lucas told him 4 minutes was a good number, and that the problem had never been the 4 minutes. Claire Donovan was promoted twice in 8 months, first to a supervisory role in Omaha, and then into a position Catherine Sloan created at Lucas's direction station compliance lead, a job whose entire function was to hold the authority to say no to a shift manager. Claire had opened a record on a Wednesday evening because a passenger asked her to, and it had cost her nothing and had changed everything. And Lucas told her when he shook her hand that the company had been saved by one person doing the ordinary thing at the ordinary moment. Alan Whitaker and Nora Kessler were each given letters for their files, stating that they had exercised independent command authority correctly under pressure. Lucas wrote both letters himself and did not sign them as owner. He signed them as a passenger. Vanessa Cole was not sued, and she was not banned. In late September, she published a signed statement under her own name and read it aloud in a conference room in Omaha to 14 people, most of whom she had never met, including Claire Donovan and Bethany Kroll, and a woman from the North Line call center who had taken 3 of the calls that night. She set out what she had done at Gate 14, in order without softening any part of it. She said she had used money first and relationships second, and that both had worked immediately, and that the speed with which they had worked was the thing she could not stop thinking about. Then she did the part that was not required of her. She had spent the summer inside her own firm's records and had found 9 occasions across 4 years in which her office had made the same kind of request at an airport counter, and she read those out too, and said that she had not known about 6 of them, and that not knowing had been the arrangement. She made restitution to every passenger who could be identified and stepped down from her firm's board. Lucas was in the room and said nothing while she spoke, and afterward told her only that the statement had been enough, which was neither forgiveness nor its refusal. And she seemed to understand the difference. The fund was announced in November, and it was called Homeward Wings. It did one thing. When a person needed to reach a dying relative or a funeral and could not afford the fare or could not find a seat, the fund paid for the ticket and, more importantly, held a small number of protected seats on every Apex flight that could not be sold, released, or reviewed away by anyone at any station for any reason. Lucas insisted on the second part more than the first. Money, he said, was the easy half. The hard half was making sure that when a person with no leverage stood at a counter at 6 in the evening, the seat behind them could not be taken. The fund moved 4,200 people in its first year. Lucas never once appeared at an event for it. He went back to the house on the west edge of Omaha with the gravel drive and the leaning mailbox, and he did not fix either of them. He still bought his coffee from the gas station on Dodge Street, and the woman behind the counter still believed he worked in insurance, and he still did not correct her. He had built the anonymity originally, so he could see how the world treated a man who looked like nothing. He kept it afterward because he had gotten his answer, and because the only useful thing to do with an answer like that was to spend the rest of his working life making sure it came out differently for the next person standing at that counter. He had held every kind of power a man could hold, and on the one night it mattered most, none of it moved an aircraft an inch. What moved was a gate agent who opened a record. She was not required to open a pastor who held a graveside a few minutes longer, and a captain who had buried his own father alone and waited 17 years to make sure someone else did not have to. Money opens doors. It opened every door in that terminal in 14 minutes. But decency, integrity, and the plain refusal to treat another person as an obstacle are the only things that make a man worth the doors he walks through. Never measure a person by what they appear to be. The quiet one standing in front of you in the worn jacket asking for nothing but what he is owed may be holding more than you could ever imagine, and the proof of who he is will be that he never once has to tell you.